You know, life has a funny way of just chugging along, doesn't it? For me, my days were a comfortable rhythm, a dance I knew by heart, especially when it came to my marriage. John and I had built a life that felt solid, reliable, the kind of partnership where trust was just the air we breathed. There were no grand gestures needed to confirm it. It was simply there, woven into the fabric of our everyday. I truly believed in what we had, in the quiet understanding that had grown between us over the years. One ordinary Tuesday, something shifted, though I didn't recognize it at first. John had left his phone on the kitchen counter, which wasn't unusual, but a notification popped up and my eyes just happened to catch it. It was from his friend, Mark, a quick text casually mentioning some party this weekend. My heart gave a little flutter, a tiny spark of excitement igniting, because I immediately thought, oh good, a chance for us to go out, unwind a bit. I figured he'd tell me about it later, maybe during dinner, or when we were winding down for the night. I even pictured us talking about what we'd wear, or if we'd need to bring a dish. But the days just kept ticking by. Wednesday, Thursday, then Friday, and not a single word about it. That little flicker of excitement started to dim, replaced by a subtle, creeping unease. It wasn't a loud alarm bell, just a quiet, persistent hum that something felt a bit off. I found myself going over it in my head, trying to rationalize it away. Maybe Mark had been mistaken, or perhaps the party was just a small gathering, nothing big enough to even mention. I kept telling myself, don't be silly, Veronica. John's always been upfront with you. But that little voice, the one that whispers doubts, just wouldn't quiet down. It was like a tiny pebble in my shoe, not painful enough to stop me, but certainly annoying. The days stretched into evenings, and each time John came home, I'd subtly try to steer the conversation. Anything interesting happened today? Or, got any plans this weekend, honey? He'd talk about work, about what he'd picked up from the dry cleaner, or what was on TV, but never once did the party come up. My disappointment started to morph into something else, a quiet, almost imperceptible worry that was just starting to bloom. It truly gnawed at me, this unspoken thing. I kept replaying the text in my mind, the casualness of it. It wasn't an invite to John, just a mention of a party, but why wouldn't he mention it to me? That question circled in my thoughts, a persistent little fly buzzing around my ear. I desperately wanted to dismiss my growing suspicion, to just trust completely, but the silence from him was becoming deafening. I found myself watching him more closely than usual, observing his reactions, searching for any telltale sign that he was keeping something from me. My stomach would tighten every time he picked up his phone, half expecting to see another message about it, half dreading it. It was like I was caught between two competing instincts, the deep-seated trust I had in him and this new, unsettling suspicion that felt completely out of place in our comfortable life. The weekend loomed, a silent, uninvited guest in our home. I kept thinking, any minute now he'll bring it up. He'll say, hey, Veronica, fancy going to Mark's party? But the words never came. The anticipation turned into a dull ache, a feeling of being left out, even though I hadn't actually been left out of anything concrete. It was all happening in the quiet corners of my own mind. That persistent, unanswered question about the party truly began to gnaw at me. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was about the silence, the omission. It was a tiny crack appearing in the otherwise perfectly smooth surface of our shared life. And as the day of the party drew closer, I knew deep down, with a gut feeling I couldn't ignore, that I needed to understand why. Well, the day of the party finally arrived, and I woke up with this knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. I was trying to act normal, just going through the motions of breakfast and getting ready for the day. And then, as if on cue, John dropped his bombshell. Honey, he said, sounding a little too casual, I've got to work late tonight. Unexpected overtime. Sounds like it'll keep me tied up until the early hours. My heart sank, but a cold certainty washed over me at the same time. The words barely registered past the alarm bells that instantly started clanging in my head. Work late? Unexpected overtime? It was such a flimsy excuse, especially when paired with his complete silence about the party. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, and that quiet suspicion I'd been battling hardened into a concrete, undeniable knowing. My gut screamed at me. Something was absolutely, terribly wrong. It was like a switch flipped inside me. That moment, hearing his flimsy alibi, cemented it. The disappointment I'd felt over the past few days transformed into a sharp, bitter taste of betrayal. It wasn't just about a party anymore. It was about the lie, the deception. A desperate need for answers, a burning desire to know the truth, began to override everything else. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I couldn't just sit at home and wonder. A sudden, fierce determination took hold of me. I mean, my stomach was still churning with nerves, but there was this new, steel-like resolve hardening my resolve. I couldn't just sit there, stewing in my anxiety and letting my imagination run wild. I had to know, plain and simple. The thought of confronting him directly, right then and there, crossed my mind for a fleeting second, but it felt premature. I needed proof, something tangible before I unleashed the storm, so I started getting ready, my movements precise and almost robotic. It was like I was putting on a performance for myself, trying to convince my trembling hands that everything was perfectly normal. I told John I was just going to visit a friend, a quick coffee or something light, something that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. I watched his face carefully as I said it, searching for any flicker of guilt or recognition, but he just nodded, too engrossed in his phone. The air in the house suddenly felt thick, heavy with unspoken truths. Every breath I took was shallow, as if the oxygen itself was being consumed by the growing tension. My heart was pounding, a drum solo in my chest, and my mind was racing with all the possibilities, each one more painful than the last. But beneath the fear and the hurt, there was this surge of adrenaline, pushing me forward, whispering, "You've got this, Veronica. You need to know." As I stepped out into the evening, the familiar sounds of our quiet street felt strangely muffled, like I was moving through water. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anxiety gnawing at me, a bitter taste of betrayal lingering, but also this fierce determination, a cold resolve. The air was crisp, but I barely felt it, too consumed by the churning in my stomach and the pounding in my ears. I was heading into the unknown, driven by a desperate need for clarity, no matter how painful it might be. Every step I took towards the car felt heavy, laden with the weight of what I was about to do. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, trying to steady myself. The headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the path ahead, but my own future felt shrouded in a thick fog. It wasn't just a drive, it was a journey into the heart of my deepest fears, a forced confrontation with a truth I truly hoped wasn't waiting for me. The silence in the car was deafening, amplifying every doubt, every what if that screamed in my head. I pictured the party, the laughter, the carefree atmosphere I expected to find, and it felt like a cruel joke compared to the quiet storm brewing inside me. I had to know, and the thought propelled me forward, pushing aside the fear, pushing aside the uncertainty. My destination wasn't just a party. It was the precipice of a revelation. I pulled up to the house, and even from the street, I could hear the party. The bass thrummed against the pavement, a vibrant, almost mocking pulse that vibrated through me. Laughter spilled out into the cool night air, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the occasional burst of music. It was everything I'd imagined. Loud, lively, completely disconnected from the quiet, tense world I'd been living in for the past few days. A stark contrast, really, to the turmoil churning inside me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the car door, that knot in my stomach tightening even further. Every step towards the entrance felt like walking a tightrope, with my heart pounding against my ribs. I tried to blend into the stream of people heading inside, hoping no one would notice the raw anxiety etched onto my face. The sheer volume of the music hit me like a physical wave as I crossed the threshold, and the smell of various perfumes, stale drinks, and something vaguely sweet filled my nostrils. My eyes immediately began to scan the crowded room, darting from face to face, trying to locate him amidst the swirling mass of bodies. It was hard to focus, with so many people laughing, dancing, and talking over the music. My gaze swept across the living room, through the kitchen, and then towards the back of the house, a desperate search for the man I thought I knew so well. Every second felt like an eternity, an excruciating wait for the inevitable. And then, just as a cold wave of despair was beginning to settle over me, I saw him. It was almost as if time itself slowed down, every other noise and movement in the room fading into a distant hum. He was in a secluded corner, partially obscured by a tall potted plant and the shadows cast by the dim lighting, but there was no mistaking him. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp that no one else seemed to notice amidst the revelry. He wasn't alone. Another woman was there, her back mostly to me, but I could see her hand resting on his arm. And then he leaned in, and their lips met. A long, passionate embrace that seemed to last an eternity. My world, the stable, loving world I'd built with him, imploded right there and then. It was a brutal, visceral blow, a shockwave that rattled me to my very core, leaving me utterly breathless and hollowed out. The sight was pure agony, a punch to the gut that stole all the air from my lungs. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a profound sense of betrayal that coursed through every vein, a cold, sickening realization that everything I thought was real had been a lie. My eyes burned, but no tears came, just a searing heat that prickled behind my eyelids. It was as if my body had gone into shock, my limbs heavy, rooted to the spot, unable to move or react. I instinctively pulled back into the shadows, a desperate need to remain unseen washing over me. It was a bizarre, almost out-of-body experience, watching this devastating scene unfold as if I were a ghost. The world continued around them, oblivious, while my own world had just shattered into a million pieces. The laughter and music of the party became a distant, mocking soundtrack to my unraveling. All I could do was stand there, frozen, a silent witness to my own heartbreak. As the initial shock slowly, painfully, began to recede, a new, colder sensation started to spread through me, like ice water filling my veins. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a simmering rage, a deep, burning indignation. The image of their embrace burned behind my eyes, etching itself into my memory, and with it came the first, quiet stirrings of something far more potent than tears. A cold resolve began to take root in the wreckage of my emotions. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but beneath it, a plan was beginning to form, hazy at first, but undeniably present. As I watched them, completely unaware of my presence, a silent promise hardened within me. They had no idea what was coming, and that thought, chilling as it was, gave me a strange, dark sense of purpose. I left the party then, a ghost in the crowd, slipping out just as silently as I'd arrived. There was no confrontation, no dramatic scene, just a quiet, almost surgical removal of myself from that moment. My legs felt strangely light, yet my heart was a lead weight in my chest. Every single detail of what I'd just witnessed was seared into my mind, a brutal slideshow playing on repeat, but now a new, cold determination began to override the raw pain. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and silent, simmering rage. My mind, usually so prone to emotional turmoil, had suddenly become incredibly clear, almost clinical. The tears still hadn't come, which surprised me, but in their place, a single, unwavering purpose had taken hold. I needed to make them pay. The initial shock had given way to a fierce, almost primal urge for retribution, a desire to restore balance to a world they had so carelessly upended. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't just lash out. This wasn't about a messy public scene right away. No, this had to be precise, calculated. I needed to gather more information, to understand the full extent of his deception, and frankly, who she was. The idea of subtly digging, of playing detective in my own life, was chilling, but it also felt like the only path forward. I had to know everything before I made my next move. The first thing I did when I got home, after making sure John was truly working late, was to head straight for his phone. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. I needed to see if there were more messages, more clues, anything that could tell me how long this had been going on, or just who this woman was. It felt dirty, invasive, but a voice inside me screamed that he had already invaded my life, my trust, far worse. As I scrolled through his texts and call logs, a sickening pattern began to emerge. Her name popped up repeatedly, subtle at first, then more frequent, woven into conversations that seemed innocent on the surface. Each message, each casual mention, was a tiny stab, confirming the depth of his deception. It was like peeling back layers of an onion, each one revealing more of the bitter, stinging truth that had been hidden right under my nose. I spent hours on my laptop, a cold, focused energy guiding my fingers. I looked her up, cross-referencing names, social media profiles, anything I could find. Each piece of information I uncovered about her felt like another weapon in my arsenal. It wasn't about anger anymore, not purely. It was about strategy, about meticulously building a case, piece by agonizing piece, to ensure that when I finally struck, it would be with devastating precision. Over the next few days, I became a master of disguise, an actress in my own home. I maintained a facade of perfect normalcy, greeting John with a smile, discussing our mundane routines, even asking about his long hours at work. Inside, though, I was seething, every pleasant word a lie, every casual touch a fresh sting. It felt like playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse, and I was the one holding all the cards, though he had no idea. The rage, however, wasn't a wild, uncontrolled fire. It was cold, precise, fueling my every move. I started thinking about the logistics, the timing, how to make the exposure utterly devastating for them both. The details were crucial. This couldn't just be a messy accusation. No, this had to be undeniable, public, and leave no room for doubt or escape. My mind was already picturing the fallout, the consequences that would inevitably unfold. This quiet, meticulous planning became my solace, a way to channel the intense pain and anger. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every potential scenario I considered, felt like a step towards reclaiming what they had stolen from me. The rage wasn't consuming me, it was empowering me. And as I continued to play the unsuspecting wife, I knew their day of reckoning was approaching, closer than they could ever imagine. The day finally came when all my meticulous planning culminated in action. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger. It was a cold, calculated move, executed with a precision that would have made John's work look amateur. I chose a moment when he least expected it, a setting that would amplify the shock and ensure the maximum impact. It felt like I was moving through a dream, calm and detached, even as the storm I was about to unleash gathered force. I had arranged for the evidence to surface in a way that was undeniable and public, leaving no room for his usual charming denials or attempts to twist the narrative. It wasn't just about showing him, it was about showing everyone, especially those who had always seen him as the perfect husband. The feeling of the pieces finally falling into place, of the trap slowly closing, was surprisingly empowering, a stark contrast to the despair I'd felt just days before. The atmosphere in the room, wherever I chose to make my move, would be thick with anticipation, though only I knew why. I could almost feel the collective gasp, the sudden silence as the truth was laid bare. It wasn't about vengeance in the hot-blooded sense anymore. It was about justice, about exposing the raw, ugly truth of his betrayal for all to see. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a powerful sense of control. The reactions, when the affair was finally exposed, were exactly what I had anticipated, and yet somehow still staggering to witness. John's face, a mask of shock and disbelief, was something I'll never forget. The color drained from him and he looked utterly lost, as if the ground had simply vanished beneath his feet. And her? She went from smug confidence to a deer-in-headlights terror in a heartbeat, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The fallout was swift and brutal. My lawyer, whom I'd quietly consulted long before this moment, already had the divorce papers ready. There was no need for arguments or messy debates. The evidence spoke for itself. His reputation, once so carefully cultivated, began to unravel publicly, like a cheap suit coming apart at the seams. It was painful, yes, watching the life we'd built crumble, but there was also a chilling satisfaction in seeing the truth finally have its day. Mutual friends, those who had always admired John and Veronica, were stunned. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the raw reality laid bare, while others offered quiet, empathetic words. It wasn't about winning their sympathy, though. It was about acknowledging that what he had done was wrong, and that I wouldn't stand idly by and let it fester in the shadows. The consequences for him, and for her, were undeniable, a direct result of their choices. As the dust began to settle, a different kind of feeling started to emerge within me. It wasn't triumph, not exactly, but a deep, quiet sense of justice. The sharp pain of betrayal slowly began to recede, replaced by a powerful sense of closure. It was like I had been holding my breath for months, and now, finally, I could exhale, truly exhale, for the first time. The end of my marriage, though painful, became a gateway to reclaiming my own life. I wasn't defined by his betrayal. Instead, I was defined by my strength, my resilience, and my fierce determination to stand up for myself. It was a journey from devastation to self-empowerment, a path I wouldn't have chosen, but one that ultimately led me to a stronger, more authentic version of myself. I realized I was capable of so much more than I ever imagined. This newfound strength wasn't about bitterness. It was about moving forward, about rebuilding on solid ground. The public disgrace he faced, the consequences of his actions, simply cleared the way for my own healing to truly begin. I had found my own powerful, albeit painful sense of justice, and it allowed me to finally turn the page and look towards a future where my happiness was entirely in my own hands.